The neighbors spoke of Eleanor Whitcomb as though she were made of porcelain. Fragile, beautiful, untouchable. She baked for charity, laughed politely at dinner parties, and kept her garden trimmed so perfectly it looked staged. To Daniel, her husband of 6 years, she was a source of quiet pride. She moved with a grace that turned heads yet never invited questions. From the outside, theirs was the kind of marriage people envied. Inside, the silence between them had begun to grow heavy, as if their home had learned to hold its breath. Daniel often found her staring into the distance when she thought no one was watching, her expression vacant, almost rehearsed. One night, restless, Daniel padded downstairs for water. The kitchen was cloaked in darkness save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Eleanor stood before it, the light casting her figure in an eerie silhouette. She did not move until she sensed his presence. Then she turned, smile intact, voice soft. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He nodded, though something about her tone left him uneasy. Later, when they lay in bed, Eleanor drifted quickly into slumber. Daniel lingered, tracing the lines of her face in the shadows. Her breathing deepened, steady and calm, until a sound broke the stillness. She whispered a name, a man's name Daniel had never heard. Her lips moved again, shaping words that chilled him. "They'll never know." "Not yet." He froze, his chest tightening, his mind clawing for explanation. Was it a dream, a memory, a confession buried in sleep? Daniel closed his eyes, but the words echoed louder than the silence. And for the first time, he questioned if he truly knew the woman lying beside him. The following evening, his unease would sharpen, drawn to a drawer in her study that should not have been locked. The morning after Eleanor's whispered confession, Daniel could not focus. The house felt charged, each shadow too sharp, each silence too long. Eleanor moved about with her usual composure, humming faintly as she poured tea, her hands steady as porcelain. He wanted to believe nothing was wrong, yet every gesture felt like a performance. That afternoon, while she tended to the roses outside, Daniel wandered into her study. The room was always immaculate, books aligned in perfect symmetry, curtains drawn to a soft amber glow. It carried the faint scent of lavender polish, a detail Eleanor fussed over. But something caught his eye. A drawer in the mahogany desk, lower right, its brass handle gleaming faintly. He tried to pull it open. It did not budge, locked. Daniel frowned. Eleanor never mentioned locking anything. Her world was meant to be transparent, unguarded. Why would she seal away only one drawer? He crouched, fingertips brushing over the keyhole. A thin layer of dust suggested it was seldom touched, yet the lock itself shone as though recently polished. His pulse quickened. He checked the other drawers, stationery, envelopes, ledgers, all ordinary. Only this one resisted him. The back door clicked shut. Eleanor was returning. Daniel stood quickly, moving away from the desk, pretending to scan a book on the shelf. She entered, her face radiant with calm, though her eyes lingered on the desk longer than necessary. "You never come in here," she said lightly, her voice carrying a subtle edge. "I was looking for a pen," Daniel replied, forcing a smile. Her lips curved, but the stillness in her gaze unsettled him. She reached across the desk, sliding a notebook into place, her fingers brushing the locked drawer with unconscious precision. Daniel felt a shiver creep through him. That night, when Eleanor slept once more, he lay awake, replaying every glance, every pause. The locked drawer had become a question lodged deep inside his chest, and questions, he feared, had a way of demanding answers. It would take only one slip, a notification he was never meant to see, for the truth to begin unraveling. Daniel's curiosity turned to obsession. The locked drawer haunted him, yet Eleanor gave him nothing. Her days were filled with perfect routines, her nights wrapped in calm silence. He almost convinced himself it was nothing, until the mistake came. It was late, the house still. Eleanor had left her phone charging on the nightstand. A faint buzz stirred Daniel from restless half-sleep. Without thinking, he glanced at the screen, a notification. A transfer confirmation. He sat up. The numbers burned against the darkness, millions moving between accounts he had never seen before. His breath hitched. Eleanor stirred slightly beside him, turning over, but did not wake. Daniel's hands shook as he read again, making sure his eyes were not deceiving him. The sum was obscene, the kind of figure no one could quietly misplace. The phone locked itself, the glow fading, but Daniel's mind raced on. Where had that money come from? And more urgently, why was it hidden? The following day, Daniel lingered near her desk after she left for errands. He opened a folder she had carelessly left behind. Inside were letters, neatly stacked, some bearing the crest of local charities. He recognized the names. Neighbors, friends, people who trusted Eleanor with donations and accounts. The sums in the letters were generous, life-changing, yet the tone was desperate, questioning delays, asking why funds had not reached their cause. Daniel's stomach turned cold. The locked drawer, the late-night whispers, the transfer on her phone, it all merged into a single, horrifying possibility. This wasn't hidden wealth. It was stolen. That evening, over dinner, Eleanor's face glowed in the candlelight. She laughed softly at something he said, her hands graceful as she lifted her glass. To anyone else, she would have seemed flawless. But Daniel couldn't tear his mind from the truth clawing at him. He needed to know more, needed to be certain, and certainty came faster than expected. That night, as he held Eleanor close, the phone buzzed again. This time, the notification glowed against his skin. Another transfer. Another fortune shifting into the shadows. His blood ran cold. And then, the phone rang, an unfamiliar voice waiting on the other end, asking for Eleanor by a name he had never heard before. The phone rang in the quiet of the evening, its shrill tone cutting through the house like a blade. Daniel, still rattled from the transfers, reached for it before Eleanor could. Her laughter from the kitchen drifted faintly as he pressed the receiver to his ear. "Is Margaret there?" The voice was sharp, male, laced with fury. Daniel froze. "You must have the wrong number. No Margaret lives here?" A silence followed, heavy and deliberate. Then came a low chuckle, bitter as rust. "She told you her name was something else, didn't she?" The words tightened Daniel's grip on the phone. His throat was dry. "Who is this?" "You'll find out soon enough. She'll bleed you dry the way she did me. The way she's done to countless others." The voice cracked with rage, trembling as though fighting to stay in control. "Don't think you're special. She'll take everything. And when she's done, you'll be nothing." Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He wanted to ask more, but the line went dead. Only the empty hiss of static remained. Slowly, he lowered the receiver, his hand trembling. Margaret. The name struck him like a foreign key forced into a lock. Eleanor had another life, one she'd buried under layers of grace and silence. Eleanor entered the room carrying 2 glasses of wine. She paused when she saw his face, her eyes narrowing. "Who was it?" she asked, her tone light yet edged with suspicion. Daniel hesitated. "Wrong number," he lied, the words scraping his throat. Her smile lingered too long, her gaze piercing. She handed him the glass, watching him drink as though weighing his every twitch. For the first time, Daniel wondered if the woman he had married was real at all, or if she was only a mask worn by someone else entirely. And when he finally dared to confront her, what he heard would be no apology but a confession sharp enough to shatter what little trust remained. Daniel could no longer bury the truth beneath silence. The phone call, the stolen money, the name Margaret. It circled his mind like vultures over carrion. That night, after Eleanor drifted to sleep, he sat in the darkness staring at her shape beside him, rehearsing the words he would say. When dawn came, he could not hold it in any longer. He waited until the house was silent, the only light a candle flickering on the dining table. Eleanor walked in, her expression curious but composed. "We need to talk," Daniel began, his voice brittle. "I know about the transfers. I know you've lied to me. Someone called last night asking for Margaret. Who are you, really?" For the briefest moment, her mask slipped. A shadow crossed her face before she leaned closer, her eyes glinting in the candlelight. Her smile was calm, unnervingly calm. "You'd never understand why I did it," she whispered. Daniel's stomach turned. "Then explain. Tell me." She rested her hand against the table, tapping a finger rhythmically against the wood. "Do you know what it means to be underestimated? To be seen as fragile, harmless, incapable of wielding power? Men underestimate, always. They trust, they hand over control, believing themselves safe. That's how I win." Her voice was steady, not a confession but a sermon. "They think I belong to them. I let them believe it. And when the time comes, I take what is mine." Daniel stared at her, his chest tightening. "What about me? What am I to you? Her smile widened, a cold glimmer in her eyes. You were convenient. A perfect alibi. A mask of respectability. You made the stage look real. The words hit him like ice water. Every trace of their marriage rewritten in an instant. She had never seen him as a partner, only as cover. He pushed back from the table, breath shallow, but she tilted her head slightly as though studying him. You can leave if you like, Daniel. But don't forget, every secret you've uncovered ties you to me. If I fall, I'll make sure you fall harder. Her calmness terrified him more than anger ever could, and as he reeled from her words, a figure from her past was already moving closer, carrying stories Daniel was not prepared to hear. Daniel could not erase Eleanor's words from his mind. He was no husband, only camouflage, a prop in her theater of deception. Sleep abandoned him. He drifted through the house like a ghost, haunted by questions that gnawed deeper each day. The answers came in the form of a knock. Rain lashed against the windows as Daniel opened the door. A man stood beneath the storm, soaked through, his frame hunched as though years of grief had carved into his bones. His eyes darted past Daniel, searching the shadows within. I need to speak to you, the stranger muttered, voice trembling. It's about her. They sat across from one another in the dim parlor. The man's hands shook as he withdrew photographs from his coat. Faded images of Eleanor, younger, her hair styled differently, her name scrawled on the back in unfamiliar ink. Except it wasn't Eleanor. The names shifted. Margaret, Celeste, Isabel. I loved her once, the man whispered, his voice raw. She told me she'd build a life with me. But every promise was a step closer to ruin. When she vanished, she took everything. My savings, my family's trust, even my name. I was left with nothing but debt and disgrace. Daniel's chest tightened as the man unfolded documents, records of offshore accounts, trails of false identities, all tied to the same face. Every detail was a blade, cutting through the illusion of marriage Daniel had clung to. Eleanor had rehearsed this performance many times before. He was merely the latest act. The man's eyes shone with fury and despair. She will not stop. She doesn't know how, and if you think you can escape, you're already too deep. A shadow shifted in the hallway. Eleanor stood there silent, her expression unreadable, as if she had been listening all along. Her smile curved faintly, cold, knowing. And before Daniel could speak, a new player would enter, a detective who had spent years chasing the woman he thought he loved. The rain had barely eased when another knock came, firm and deliberate. Daniel's nerves were raw, and when he opened the door, he was met not with another stranger, but with authority. A tall man stood on the step, trenchcoat damp, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Mr. Whitcomb? Detective Inspector Harris, he said, flashing his badge. His voice carried the weight of years spent chasing ghosts. We need to talk. About your wife. Daniel felt the world tilt, but he led the man inside. They sat at the dining table. The candle from the night before still burned low, its wax pooling. Harris placed a file between them, sliding out a photograph. Eleanor's face stared back, colder, sharper than the woman Daniel thought he knew. Beneath it, another name, and another. I've been following her for nearly a decade, Harris said, lighting a cigarette, smoke coiling like a warning. She changes identities like clothes. Each time someone's life collapses, money drained, trust shattered, and she walks away untouched. Daniel shook his head. You're saying she's a criminal, a thief? She's more than that, Harris replied, leaning closer, his voice low. She's dangerous. The moment she senses suspicion, she'll twist it. You'll be the one accused. You'll be the one ruined. That's how she survives. Daniel's heart pounded. Then arrest her. You have the proof. Harris exhaled smoke, his eyes bleak. She leaves no proof. By the time we arrive, the trail is ash. You've led her too close, and that makes you vulnerable. Daniel gripped the edge of the table, torn between disbelief and dread. His life had become a trap, the walls closing in. Harris leaned back, his cigarette burning low. If you value what's left of your life, walk away before she decides you're expendable. The detective's warning lingered like smoke in Daniel's lungs, but walking away felt impossible. Eleanor had him bound, by love, by fear, by secrets. And as her world began to crumble under whispered rumors and frozen accounts, Daniel would watch the mask of the perfect wife fracture into something far darker. Detective Harris's warning clung to Daniel like a fever. But the cracks in Eleanor's world revealed themselves without his intervention. Within weeks, the whispers began. Neighbors who once admired her polished charm now exchanged sidelong glances. Friends stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. The first real blow came when her bank cards were declined at a charity gala. Eleanor's smile never faltered, yet Daniel saw her knuckles whiten as she gripped her glass. That night, she tore open letters in her study, her movements frantic. The drawer that once concealed her secrets, now a vault of demands and threats. Accounts had been frozen, transactions flagged. The walls were tightening. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching as she paced, her breath shallow. She poured herself wine, the crimson liquid spilling onto the marble counter like a wound spreading. Her hand trembled, and for the first time she looked less like porcelain and more like something fractured. "They're turning on me," she muttered, her voice raw, not meant for him but for the darkness. Then louder, sharper. "They think they can strip me of everything." The mirror above the fireplace caught her reflection, and with sudden violence she hurled the glass against it. Shards rained down, her image splintering into 100 broken faces. Daniel flinched, but she only laughed, a brittle, echoing sound. "You think you've seen me fall, Daniel?" she hissed, stepping closer, her eyes wild yet strangely lucid. "This is not the end. This is where I change. They'll regret underestimating me," he whispered. "You can't keep running from this. It's over." Her lips curled, the faintest shadow of a smile. "If I fall, I'll make sure you fall with me." The words rooted him to the floor. Her empire of lies was collapsing, yet she stood in the ruins like a queen refusing to yield her throne. Daniel realized with chilling clarity that she wasn't breaking. She was planning, and the very next morning when the house lay silent, he would wake to discover she was gone. The morning began with an uncanny stillness. Daniel woke to the echo of silence, the kind that felt deliberate, staged. The side of the bed where Eleanor should have been was cold, the sheets pulled tight as if she had never lain there. He stumbled into the wardrobe and froze. Her dresses, her coats, her shoes, gone. Only the empty hangers swayed gently, tapping against each other like brittle bones. A faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, mocking him with its absence. On the windowsill sat a half-empty glass of wine, untouched since the night before. The liquid had dried into a dark stain at the base, like blood clotted at a wound. She had left it behind, just as she had left him behind without a word. Daniel searched the house room by room, panic rising with each discovery. Drawers stripped bare, boxes missing. The safe wide open, hollow. His own accounts, when checked, showed transfers he didn't authorize. Millions vanished into shadows of banks he had never heard of. She had left him with nothing but questions, and the storm outside the house felt like an omen that there would be no answers. The knock on the door came before noon. Authorities. Their questions were sharp, accusatory. How long had he known? Where was she now? Did he help her move the money? Each inquiry cut deeper, and Daniel could only stammer the truth he barely believed himself. "I don't know where she is," he whispered, voice breaking under the weight of disbelief. But the officers weren't convinced. To them, he wasn't the victim. He was the husband who slept beside a thief, the man who benefited from her stolen empire. He felt the world tilting, his life collapsing beneath accusations he couldn't outrun. When the house emptied and silence returned, Daniel sank onto the sofa, staring at the shattered mirror across the room. Her reflection no longer haunted it. Only his own hollow face stared back, and yet as night fell, one question gnawed at him, relentless. Had she run to escape? Had someone taken her? Or had this always been the grand finale she had orchestrated, vanishing just before the world caught her? The silence offered no reply. Years slipped by, but the memory of Eleanor never loosened its grip on Daniel's life. He rebuilt in fragments. A smaller flat, modest work, days blurred by routine. To the world, he was a man trying to move on. But inside, her absence lived like a wound that refused to close. The authorities had stopped calling. The newspapers had stopped printing her name. Yet every time Daniel passed a stranger with dark hair or caught the faint trace of a familiar perfume, his chest tightened with the same silent question. What if it's her? One rainy afternoon, years after she vanished, Daniel sat in Heathrow's crowded terminal. His flight had been delayed. The building hummed with restless bodies, children crying, announcements echoing across polished floors. He leaned forward, suitcase between his knees, eyes unfocused on the streams of travelers. And then he saw her, a figure gliding through the crowd with a grace that made the chaos around her seem staged. Elegant coat, dark glasses, head high as though the world still belonged to her. For a heartbeat, Daniel thought his mind was playing its cruelest trick yet. But then she turned her head. Her eyes met his. The crowd dissolved in that moment. Noise fell away. The years of searching, of doubt, of accusation, all narrowed into that single gaze. She didn't look startled or guilty. She looked amused. A faint smile curved her lips, sharp, knowing, deliberate. Daniel's breath caught. His hands clenched the suitcase so tightly the leather creaked beneath his grip. He tried to rise, his body trembling. But before his legs could obey, the moment shattered. She slipped back into the tide of travelers, her figure swallowed whole by the blur of motion. No trace left behind, no name on a boarding pass. Just the echo of that smile burned into him like a brand. Eleanor. His voice cracked, too soft against the roar of the terminal. Nobody turned, nobody knew. He sat back down, shaking, heart hammering against his ribs. He could taste the bitterness of being toyed with. It was no accident. She had wanted him to see her. She had chosen this moment years later to remind him that she was still out there, that she would always be one step ahead. A family passed by, laughing, unaware of the storm raging inside the man seated among them. Daniel pressed his palms against his face, his mind looping through the same poisoned truth. There would be no justice, no closure, only the certainty that her story wasn't finished. As the boarding call echoed, Daniel rose on unsteady feet, the suitcase suddenly heavier than ever. He walked toward the gate carrying not just his belongings but the unbearable knowledge that she could appear again, anywhere, anytime. And when she did, she would decide what happened next.